tonight. The Information Regulator of South Africa says it will analyze the revised WhatsApp privacy policy to assess whether its terms of service are in compliance with the Protection of Personal Information Act. It comes after the regulator made contact with Facebook South Africa, which has provided it with the WhatsApp privacy policy. And of course, it was revised on the 4th of January. Well, joining me now is the chairperson of the Information Regulator of South Africa, Advocate Pensi Tlakula. Good evening, Advocate Tlakula. A pleasure to have you on. Now, I understand that yourselves as the Information Regulator and some of your colleagues met on Wednesday to really look at these privacy regulations and I suppose chart a way forward for South Africa. What came out of that meeting?
Good evening, Kathy, to you and your viewers. Yes, indeed, yesterday we met. This is after we had written to Facebook and requested them to give us the controversial privacy policy that you have referred to, and they did that. They gave us two policies, two links to policies. One is a policy that applies to users outside Europe, and the second one is the one that applies to users in Europe. What is interesting, Kathy, is that when you click on both those links, it takes you only to the privacy policy for users outside Europe. So as we speak, we don't have the privacy policy for Europe users. And I'll tell you the importance of that. The importance of that is that if media reports are anything to go by, we have been informed that Facebook is in discussions with the regulator in Ireland, which is the Irish Data Protection Authority, which is responsible for Facebook. And the reports say that it is unlikely that Facebook will introduce this policy without them reaching some agreement with the Irish regulator. So that's very interesting. And I guess that's because of the GDPR, which is the data protection law that applies in Europe. That being the case, if they can negotiate with the authority in Ireland, which they are accountable to, what gives them, and if media reports are indeed correct, what gives them the audacity to think that in our country and other parts of the world, they can indeed introduce a policy without talking to the regulator of the country. In particular, in this instance, we are talking about South Africa, because our law here, the Protection of Personal Information laws, is modeled on the GDPR. So what we are doing at the moment, we are saying to them, okay, give us that policy that applies to Europe. Let's look at the difference between the two policies. Secondly, we'll then analyze the policy that applies to users outside Europe and see whether that policy is in line with the Protection of Personal Information Act. So that's where we are. We are doing that analysis. But what I've said is quite curious and quite concerning if media reports are correct, that there is a different treatment for users in Europe and users outside Europe.
So, you know, the interesting bit, of course, is that the kind of position that you're in allows you, I suppose, direct access to some of the officials at Facebook. Have you been unable to get this information while speaking to them? You know, because I hear you're referencing media reports quite a lot. And you, of course, as the information regulator, are an authority in this country on some of these issues.
No, we're in contact with them 3 times. We said, send us the policies. They send us the link to those policies thrice. But as I said, when you click on the link to the policy that applies in Europe, it doesn't give you what the policy says. It takes you back to the policy for non-European countries. And the importance of that, Kathy, as I said, we want to see whether there is equal treatment between users who are in Europe and users outside Europe. That's the first thing that we have to, because that we want to do. We want to do that comparative analysis because it's quite important. And then thereafter, we'll then look at the policy that applies to us in South Africa and look at whether that policy is in line with POPIA. Once we've done that analysis, we go back to Facebook to say these are our concerns, and then we'll take it from there.
Do you think that they're deliberately withholding that information from you?
No, I don't think so, because we've got quite a good working relation with them. I'm not sure whether there is a problem with their system or whether the policy that applies to users who are in Europe is simply not there. Maybe the policy is not there because, as I've indicated, Facebook is negotiating with the Irish Data Protection Authority on this matter, on the introduction of this new policy, and that they will not introduce that policy until they have an agreement with the Irish Data Protection Authority. So if they are taking that sort of line with the Europeans, they should do the same with us as well. They can't just throw this policy and say it applies, is take it or leave it, because we have a law that is similar to the GDPR, the law that says that before you further process information, you have to get the consent of the owner of the policy and of the owner of the information, of the personal information. And the consent in terms of our law, it's specific, it's voluntary expression of will on what you are consenting to. That's what our law says. So this policy, on the face of it, looks like there is a coerced or involuntary consent, because it says you consent. If you don't want to give your consent to sharing of your personal information, then leave the platform. So that can never be voluntary consent. And these are the issues that we are looking at.
Just from your initial perusal then of these privacy agreements, are there specific concerns that you have in particular for South Africans?
Yes, because we have a law here that lays down the conditions for lawful processing of personal information. Anyone who processes personal information has to comply with the conditions that are in the law. One of those conditions is that if you collect information with my consent, if you're going to process it further, then the further processing has to be in line with the original purpose for which you collected that information. And you need to get my consent to further process that information. So what WhatsApp has collected our personal information, and we gave consent, but for them to further process that information, to share it with Facebook, they then have to get our consent, because that's what the law says. And these are issues that we are looking at. We're going to analyze to see whether the 8 conditions for lawful processing of personal information are complied with by that revised policy of previous policy of the 4th of January.
That was the chairperson of the Information Regulator of South Africa, Advocate Pansy Tlakula.